Buckeyes and the Spartans, while Michigan is the game, actually this has been the game in regards to the standings and championship implications in the Big Ten for close to a decade. Got Patrick Murphy on the line from 247 Sports Bucknuts to help us break down Michigan State and Ohio State. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Can't wait for a big game on a Saturday night in Columbus. Many of us expected a little bit more resistance in Lincoln.
Yeah.
I knew that the Nebraska defense had been a sieve for several years. They talked about improvement. I didn't see it against the likes of Colorado and others. So that didn't surprise me, that part of it. But the defense to show up in Lincoln, and I do still believe that Nebraska has legitimate game-breaking, game-changing options on the perimeter. Wan'Dale Robinson and J.D. Spielman's a very productive receiver in the Big Ten. Dedrick Mills and Maurice Robinson at running back, or Maurice Washington at running back, but just could not forge anything against this Ohio State defense when it mattered. It was just another statement game for the Buckeyes, and especially the defensive side, mighty impressive.
Absolutely. And I think, the defense is the story of the year for Ohio State. We talked in the preseason or the offseason about that was something that needed to be fixed, needed to be improved. Ryan Day brought in, 4 new coaches on the defensive side of the ball. And so far it's been probably better than anyone expected. They're one of the top defensive teams in the country in all of the major statistical categories. And Nebraska was, as you mentioned, supposed to be that first offense that was going to test them. The defensive line, I think, is where it starts for Ohio State. And you saw that against Nebraska, that first drive. Jeffrey Okudah ends up with the interception of Adrian Martinez, but it's Chase Young and that defensive line that gets pressure on him, forces him out of the pocket. He's athletic enough to get away and throw the ball downfield, but it leads to that interception. And we saw that a number of times during the game, the pressure that was on Martinez and, just not being able to do what he normally is was not comfortable. And then the secondary, they've gone away from strictly man-to-man press coverage at Ohio State, which is something they started with Chris Ash back in 2014 and more or less stuck with it until Urban Meyer retired last year. Ryan Day's hired Greg Madison and Jeff Hafley to run the secondary, and it's been quite the improvement from a disappointing secondary last year. They're doing more zone. They're mixing things up. The players say, there are more coverages, that it's simplified. Everyone kind of knows what they're doing, not thinking as much. So it's hard to argue with the results thus far. And they will face, different offenses, better offenses. Wisconsin's one that I'm very interested down the road when you face a more traditional power I formation, tailbacks, that type of thing. So as opposed to the spread, we saw Nebraska actually on their most productive drive in the first half go back to under center. They did some triple option stuff almost, and we're really rolling on Ohio State. And I actually wrote about this week. Ohio State had to call a timeout. They regrouped on the sidelines, figured out what they were going to do to handle that. And then the next play is the second interception from Jeffrey Okudah. So that kind of turned the game there, because if Nebraska gets in the end zone, cuts it to 14-7, maybe have a little bit different game. But credit to the defensive staff for recognizing, hey, and Ryan Day we need to be able to come over the sideline, take a breath, figure this out. And I think, that just shows what this defense is doing this year.
And if I recall that play start to finish as well as I should, not just the Okudah interception on his back, but the pressure caused a wide throw. So on one hand, we could say, well, they lucked into an interception, and if the pass and catch would have been completed and executed, it might have been a touchdown. He was around the 7 or 8 yard line with some space, but it was forced, the errant throw, by pressure right in the face of Adrian Martinez again.
Yep.
So and that's what really turned the game in regards to the matchup that I was anticipating, was the Nebraska offense against the Ohio State defense that I really wanted to see. Was you can have all the window dressing, you can have elite athletes, you can have the spacing and so forth, but if you can't block up front, it's generally not going to work. Those guys will make a few plays, but they just don't have time, and it's disrupted. And you need the guys up front to get the job done. So as we switch to the offense against a Michigan State defense, that it's what's interesting here, Pat, is that we've seen Michigan State field statistically the best defense in the country for the past year plus, and they finally give up ground, give up yardage, points, especially in the passing game to Indiana last week. So they showed some chinks in the armor for the first time in forever. And now they face Ohio State on the road and what has been one of the most prolific offenses in the country.
Yeah, this is, last week, obviously, Ohio State's offense against Nebraska's defense was what we were looking for. This week, it's the opposite, as you mentioned. Michigan State may have given up some yards and points against Indiana last week, but I expect Mark D'Antonio and the defensive staff there to come in prepared for Ohio State. I'm really interested to see how Justin Fields handles this. This has been one of the best secondaries in the country, not just this year, but for several years. And, Ohio, as I mentioned before, Ohio State went to that press man. They kind of took Michigan State's defense as the example there. He did it in a bit different way, but that was a trademark of Michigan State before Ohio State started doing it. So they're going to try and get pressure on Justin Fields, make him uncomfortable. He's yet to throw an interception this year, over 100 passes. Mark D'Antonio brought that up this week, which makes me think he brought that up to his team. I think they're going to look to get after him, try and make him uncomfortable, as I said, and then let the secondary try and cover these talented Ohio State wide receivers and see what they can get. I believe the Ohio State offense is good enough to move the ball in Michigan State. I do think that they could slow them down a little bit, but I just think Ohio State, with the number of weapons and the number of ways they can beat you, I wrote in our game predictions that come out today, say they take away the running game, J.K. Dobbins and Master Teague, or say they take away Justin Fields throwing. There's still Justin Fields' ability to run, which we saw more last week. If he can't throw, they can go to a running game with J.K. Dobbins and Master Teague, where you have two running backs that can do some different things. If the running game is not there, Justin Fields has shown he's more than capable of getting the ball to these talented receivers. So while it will be against a better secondary, better defense entirely than Ohio State's faced, it's hard for me to envision anyone completely stopping Ohio State's offense right now. I think they're just kind of cruising right now, and it would take something special, I think, to slow them down.
For as good as Dwayne Haskins was and is, it's just a completely different dimension. So if Justin Fields, and he has been to date, can be 80 to 85% of the passer that Dwayne Haskins was, and I know that's asking a lot, but I think he's certainly capable of it. Whether I don't know if that adds up statistically, but he throws 35 touchdowns this year, certainly on a pace, but he needs to throw the touchdowns when they're going to need them, Penn State, etc., down the line. But be the guy that's efficient, takes care of the ball, makes explosive plays in the passing game, isn't going to rack up the numbers that Dwayne Haskins does. But man, to provide that other component that defenses have to account for, it's actually, again, if he's the passing quarterback at 80% of Haskins, it's a better offense just because there's more to defend for the defense and more to worry about with his running ability. And he just reminds me of Braxton Miller in regards to his, and he may turn out to be a more polished passer, but in regards to his size, his build, his ability to throw the ball, not at the level of a, traditional Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning,
right,
Tom Brady kind of guy, but in terms of arm strength and ability to just hum it when he needs to. And again, the running ability, the speed, the elusiveness, everything else, that he still reminds me of Braxton Miller.
I think Braxton Miller is a good comparison based on what we've seen. The one thing that I always felt with Braxton Miller was those intermediate throws. Sometimes he put too much on them. It just seemed like he struggled in that area. And Justin Fields has shown that he can make all the throws they've needed him to. He had a couple last week where, he was on one hash mark and threw all the way across the field, kind of demonstrating that arm strength, which you don't always see with a dual threat quarterback like that. But so far, he's proven to kind of have a little bit of everything. They haven't run him a lot just because they don't have a lot of depth, and frankly, they haven't needed to. Like I said, we saw it a little bit more against Nebraska. Some of that was called, some of that was him improvising. The first touchdown of the game was a 15-yard run where he just didn't have anything downfield, and the offensive line kind of parted the defensive line in front of him, and he had a straight line to the end zone. So why not take that? I do think this will be a test. Michigan State's going to try and confuse him. He's going to have to throw into tight windows. These cornerbacks can cover. Ohio State's receivers have done a good job of getting open, but they haven't played cornerbacks like this. So this will certainly be a test. The kid just doesn't seem to worry about this kind of stuff. I asked him this week about preparing for this Michigan State defense, and he said he's going to go about it the same way he's done every week. He feels like he prepares well. The coaches prepare him well. And, it's just a very even-keeled, attitude from him, which is what I think you want from a quarterback. All of his teammates say he's great in the huddle. Obviously we don't see that, but it seems to be working. So, I came into the season expecting Justin Fields to be good, and maybe take some time, and maybe by the end of the season, and I think we even talked about this, start to really show the player that he can be, the 5-star recruit that he was, and then maybe in 2020 really be a Heisman Trophy candidate or someone that leads the Buckeyes to a national title. So far through the first 5 games, and again, the opposition hasn't been the toughest, but he's gone out there and more than exceeded my expectations. And I think if you were to talk to people in the Ohio State program, given what they saw in the spring, he probably has exceeded everyone else's expectations as well.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is the place to be if you love the game that we love. Lock it in, like, comment, share, and subscribe. We got week 6 previews all over the place, including both sides of the Michigan State, Ohio State game on Saturday night. So check out the Sparty look that we posted just a few minutes ago. So, Pat, when you look at this offense, I'm going to give you the impossible question, because we knew it was going to score points, get yardage, that sort of thing. My concern was, are they going to do it at the right time against the right opponents? The overall numbers are just going to be there. They just have too much talent. But what would be what has impressed you the most? Because for me, it's been that they've got 3 running backs that they can trust as explosive guys that can get the ball even when there are meaningful minutes to be played, not just in mop-up duty. So that would be the thing that stands out to me, is that with Teague and Crowley, they have 2 other running backs to complement JK. But for you, in a offensive explosive year where there's so many ways to go with this question, what has impressed you the most?
To me, it's the offensive line. And I think that factors into what you said with the running backs. Obviously, if they're opening holes, it makes life a lot easier for those guys. It obviously makes life easy for the passing game if Justin Fields is protected. But Ohio State lost 4 guys from last year's team. 3 graduated, and Michael Jordan left early, which I think was a little unexpected. He played center last year. The thought was he would move back to guard and Josh Myers would step in at center. So he decided to declare for the NFL a year early. Wyatt Davis has stepped in at that guard position. Josh Myers has been very good at center. They brought in Jonah Jackson at left guard from Rutgers, a graduate transfer. He has fit in seamlessly. Thayer Munford was the one returner at left tackle. And then Brandon Bowen was the starter at right tackle for the first 4 games, was hurt last week against Nebraska. Joshua Albee, a senior who's played a good amount in his career, stepped in despite repping at left tackle the entire season. Plays right tackle near flawlessly, graded out as Ohio State's player of the game. So this offensive line, to replace 4 very good starters and have the impact that they've had, Justin Fields hasn't often had to get out of the pocket and improvise on his own because he's had time to throw, and that helps everyone out. And the same with the running backs, like I said. So that's the thing that I think has been most impressive. Maybe it's not the sexiest thing, but it makes those other positions go. And, if they struggled up front, Justin Fields can be as good as he wants. J.K. Dobbins can be as good as he wants. But if that line doesn't protect, doesn't open holes, you're not going to have those explosive plays, the big numbers that you mentioned. So that's where it starts with me. I think, you can talk about a number of different things with this Ohio State offense. Fields, as we mentioned, J.K. Dobbins really stepping it up now, over 3,000 yards in his career rushing. Looking to become the first player to have 3 1,000-yard seasons for his first 3 years, and he's well on his way. The receivers have been great. So this offense is certainly humming, but I think it starts with the offensive line. And, when you put 4 new starters in there, you never know how it's going to go. And so far, so good.
I had one of the NFL primetime games on either Sunday or Monday night, and in one drive, I heard the name Michael Jordan twice, pertaining to a sack and pertaining to a false start, and I just brought back a few memories. Not that he had a bad career. Obviously, he's starting as a rookie in the NFL. So I don't want to disparage him that way, but I know it got off to a rocky start, I believe, in that Clemson playoff game.
Yes.
In terms of having, the spotlight on him against that defensive front. But we digress, or I digress. Michigan State's a 20-point underdog in this game, Pat. My goodness, that doesn't speak to their inability because they're a top 25 team. Vegas thinks that much of the Buckeyes. When I saw it, my eyes popped like I need to get on my laptop quickly here. But at the same time, 2 years ago, the Spartans came to Columbus, and they eventually won 10 games and won the Holiday Bowl. They were a good team. They finished in the top 15 in the nation. That final was 45-3. So there is talent disparity there that they have to make up for and play not a flawless game, but they've got to play their A- game and hope the Buckeyes are playing a C game.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Michigan State when they've been able to either beat Ohio State for the most part, which has happened twice since 2012, I guess, when Urban Meyer came, once in the Big Ten championship game in 2013, and then when they upset them in Columbus in 2015 to end that undefeated run after the national championship. The key has been the defense for them, and we talked about it, but they want to make this game gross. They want to play an ugly game, and if they can slow Ohio State's offense down enough, they've been able to have success. Even last year up in East Lansing, they held Dwayne Haskins to the fewest passing yards he had all season when he played a full game. Ohio State ends up going on to win that game. I think it was 26-6, but that first half was not pleasant football, and Ohio State got some things figured out in the second half. I think the way they were, rotating receivers and rotating guys in defensively, eventually wore down Michigan State, who doesn't have quite the depth. The biggest thing for me going into this game is going to be the start. If Ohio State comes out like they have in pretty much every game this year and is able to go down the field, get in the end zone, maybe build a 10, 14-point lead early on, the crowd's really into it, I think that game could get out of hand quickly. If Michigan State's able to contain Ohio State's offense or get down the field and score themselves, take the crowd out of the game a little bit, then I think you might have a bit more of a ball game. And in Nebraska, that was another key with Nebraska last week. Ohio State was able to build a lead. We talked about that the two interceptions that changed the game, and Nebraska's crowd by halftime was out of it, and so was Nebraska. So that's going to be key for me. I think Michigan State could build on confidence of holding Ohio State, of finding the end zone early in the game. You mentioned there's a talent disparity. Well, if they're able to kind of confuse Ohio State and get them panicking a little bit for the first time all season, they haven't faced much adversity, then we'll see how it plays out. But that's going to be the big thing for me is how both teams start this game.
Yeah, for as deplorable or as exceptional as the defense has been for Michigan State for a year plus, arguably the best in the nation, the offense has been deplorable, scoring like single digits through most of the second half of 2018, pretty much picking that up this season. Had the one breakout against a MAC opponent, but really last week's performance bodes well for what they could do this weekend and in the future as they finally scored and gained a lot of yards and moved the ball through the air. Brian Lewerke, 300 yards passing. He's got 10 touchdowns and 1 pick on the season. So he's had a nice season as Michigan State finally put some points on the board, 40 and big yardage numbers against a decent Indiana defense for the first time that they've been anything close to productive on offense for, again, over a year. All right, Pat Murphy on the line, breaking down the Buckeyes. You could join him and the rest of the staff there at Bucknuts, 247 Sports platform for Ohio State football with Michigan State on the docket. We thought maybe the second of the big games in 2019. Maybe we'll make it now the first of the big games and the big challenges for the Buckeyes. Even though Ohio State's a 20-point favorite, this Michigan State team is certainly, as Ohio State fans know from recent history, not to be dismissed. I think, Pat, as we leave you here, certainly would love your comments on the series because it's been the series, even though it's not the game, and Michigan will always be Michigan and special. This has been the series in the conference since 2009, 2010.
Yeah, I completely agree. Mark D'Antonio, head coach who has not only Ohio State roots, but Ohio roots, was the defensive coordinator under Jim Tressel. was a head coach at Cincinnati before he went to Michigan State. There's a lot of members of that staff that have ties to Ohio State. A lot of Ohio players that didn't get recruited or didn't get recruited as heavily by Ohio State on the Michigan State roster. So I think that's kind of what makes these games interesting. You know, there have been, as you mentioned 2 years ago, where Ohio State's run away with things, but for the most part, these games have been close over the last several years. I think there's a lot of motivation on Michigan State's side when they play the Buckeyes because of the Ohio and Ohio State ties I mentioned. But anytime you have a good defense, you know, you're going to be able to at least be in a game or envision how you can be in a game, and that's been the key for the Spartans in every game, but specifically against Ohio State. They always seem to find a way to scheme things. Mark D'Antonio usually has a trick play or two that they pull out. I expect he'll have something cooked up for Saturday. So yeah, the series has been a fun one. As I mentioned before, there was that 2013 Big Ten championship and 2015 upset in Columbus. Both of those led to Michigan State winning the conference, and in one instance in 2015 going to the college football playoff. So as Mark D'Antonio put it this week, the Big Ten, or at least the Big Ten East, goes through Columbus. Michigan State will obviously have to come here and get a win if they're going to contend. You know, we're only a few games in. You don't want to start with a loss early in the Big Ten Conference. So it should be a fun one. Good atmosphere. You know, as much as we don't like the alternate jerseys, they tend to bring out the crowd, and you know, the black in Ohio Stadium is at least a different look. So I'm excited for Saturday night. I hope we get to see a good game. As much fun as it's been watching Ohio State blow teams out, I'd like to be still dialed in, more so in the second half rather than already writing my game stories.
Good stuff from Pat Murphy. Again, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Join him right there. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy the game.
Absolutely. Anytime.